Good evening, folks. I know people are coming in, and we're going to go ahead and get started. First off, let me just say Happy New Year to Alexandria City Public Schools. Happy New Year to everybody out there. We are so excited to have you all here this evening. I want to welcome you to the Inspiring Futures panel, and this is a part of our high school project. Tonight, we have a very distinguished panel. I am so excited I've been able to have the opportunity today to engage in discussion with our researchers this evening, and I know that you all are in definitely for a treat tonight, as well as some knowledge. And I'm so excited that the fact that I get to sit on the other end and listen and learn just like every single one of you. So my job today, one, is to first bring greetings on behalf of Alexandria City Public Schools, and to also introduce to you our moderator for this evening. Before I introduce our moderator, I do just want to say a couple of words, and that is, the high school project is probably one of the most important decisions that we have had to make here in the city of Alexandria in regards to our high school programming. And it is a huge undertaking for us. It is something that we cannot do in isolation, and this is why we're having panels such as this evening to make sure that we are getting feedback, insight, as well as support and guidance from researchers from all over this country. We are very fortunate to be in a city that is attractive not only for people to come and work in Alexandria, but also for people to come and to speak to our community. So we do have a brand out there, everybody. So we thank the panelists today for saying yes to this evening. So our moderator for this evening is Mr. Andy Rotherham. He's the co-founder and partner at Bellwether Education Partners. It's an education nonprofit. He's also a prolific writer on educational policy as well as educational issues. Mr. Rotherham is going to guide our conversation tonight with questions that are generated by our education design team. And if any of our education design team members are here this evening, if you all can please stand just for a moment to be acknowledged. Education design team members. Our education design team is made up of staff, students, as well as some of our professionals from within the community who are part of the educational design team. So today we are going to listen and learn. And as I said before, I'm really excited to hear some of the talented remarks of our group this evening. I do want to acknowledge a couple of people before I pass things over to Mr. Rotherham. Our high school principal who is allowing us to host this wonderful event this evening, Mr. Pete Ballas. If you can just wave. We also have our Chief Academic Officer and many of our senior leaders who are here this evening. I don't want to say all the titles, but the senior leadership team, if you all can just stand and wave, please. Our distinguished board members are also here. Many of them I've got to see. I don't want to miss anybody, so if you all can stand, because I can't see you all with the lights in my eyes right now. And we may have some of our city officials who are also here this evening. So if any of our city officials are here, if you all can just stand and wave for us this evening. All right, well, I don't see you. I see a couple in the back. Thank you. All right. So with that said, I would like to introduce Mr. Andy Rotherham, who is the co-founder and partner of Bellwether Educational Partners and who will serve as our moderator this evening. And I'm looking forward to listening and learning. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. It's a pleasure to. I'm gonna have to use my teacher voice. It's a it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Yeah, I hope I don't have to use. We may have to use our teacher voices. It's a pleasure to be here. We have a terrific panel, and it's really a credit to Alexandria that they brought in such an amazing group of national experts to have this conversation. What we're going to do is we're going to have a discussion amongst them with each other responding to some issues that the EDT team raised, as some of the larger context around these questions that other communities besides Alexandria are wrestling with. And then we're going to allow time for questions from the audience, and so you all can engage with them directly. And to be honest with you, with these really bright lights, that'll actually be the first chance the panelists will actually get to see what any of you actually look like. Because we're sure you're a great audience, but we actually can't see you. I want to briefly introduce the panelists just to give you a sense of who they are. That'll become more clear during the conversation, and presumably they know themselves better than I know them, so they'll weave in their really wealth of experience. But just to orient everybody, at the end is Dr. Robert Balfons. He's at Johns Hopkins. He is one of the very leading national experts on high schools, on the data around what's happening to kids in high school and afterwards, and then some of the most innovative strategies that are being used to help address some of those challenges and improve outcomes. Next to him is Jaime Castellano. He's a national authority on the education of Hispanic and Latino students here at TC. As I know you all know, Latino students are a plurality of the students here, and he can talk about both the richness of that, but as is often the case with communities up here, making sure that the richness is not the only piece, but that students are being served equitably and in an inclusive way, which is a challenge for a lot of the school districts in this area and nationally. Next to him is Dr. Pedro Noguera. He's faculty director for the Center on Transformation of Schools at UCLA. This is not his first time. He has actually been here in Alexandria before. He is an expert on reforming high school programs. He's also worked hands-on in a number of school systems. Next to him is Dr. Heidi Jacobs. She's founder and president of Curriculum Designers. She brings a wealth of experience, including really thinking about what's the kind of curriculum that students need in order to be successful in post-secondary opportunities and life. Next to her is Jonathan Plucker. Dr. Plucker is president of the National Association for Gifted Children. He's an advocate for making sure that gifted quality education is widely available, what that means for a rigorous school experience. And finally, right to my immediate right, although I don't think he's probably politically to my right, is Dr. Larry Rosenstock. Larry's the founder and head of High Tech High, which is a school in San Diego, that I've been fortunate enough to visit. He is a really innovative educator. He's worked in schools on both coasts and has put a number of ideas into practice that have really changed how people think and how policy reacts to what's happening for kids. So I want to start just with a question very briefly to each panelist, just to help you all get grounded with them. The word equity is tossed around a lot in education conversations. It's tossed around a lot in the communities here in Northern Virginia. But it's a word can mean a lot of different things. It's one of these words everybody uses, but people often define differently. So just starting right down here with you, Bob, just very briefly, when you hear equity and when you think about your work, what are you talking about? And then if all of you could respond to that.
Yeah, the simplest definition to me is that students get what they need to succeed. And in that case, it would be here, they get what they need to graduate high school, prepared for post-secondary schooling and training. And that's all students get what they need to succeed.
Let me go ahead and just simply offer you an example. So if 40% of the students attending this high school are Hispanic or Latino, then 40% of those students should be in AP classes, honors classes, and advanced academic programs.
Building on those, I would say equity is rooted in the premise that not all kids are the same. We have to respond to the different needs and interests they come with. I often say anybody with more than one child is already practicing equity at home. I'm an equity expert because I have 5, and they're not all the same. But we are also focused on outcomes, and equity is also concerned about outcomes and addressing the disparities that are so deeply entrenched in our society.
Let me take a different angle. I think equity also means everyone has equal responsibility, that we all have the responsibility to be equally involved in the preparation of students, but students need to be more responsible for their own learning. And that the community needs to be equally involved in engaging in this type of work, in re-engaging and reimagining the high school.
That was really interesting. Similar to others, I think all forms of equity are very important, but I'm primarily interested in equity of outcomes so that Students with similar abilities, interests, regardless of skin color, zip code, their parents' bank account, all stand an equally good chance of getting success.
The short answer is fundamental fairness. In our schools at High Tech High, we have 16 schools, 72% are of color, and 97% go to college.
So as you all think about this, these definitions of equity and what you bring here, what are some of the most promising models around the country? I know you shared that today with the EDT team. What were some of the things that you wanted to make sure that you've seen, that you wanted to make sure the people here were aware of as they were thinking about how they want to redesign things going forward? Pedro, I'll start with you.
So the community where I live, Culver City, California, which is a little tiny community within LA, similar demographics to this school. A third white, third Latino, third black, graduates more kids of color who are qualified to be admitted to UC, University of California, and any other high school in the state. I point to that because it's important for you to know that the work you're doing, there are real examples of schools that have done it, and we should learn from them. This is something that's not impossible. But what they've done is to make sure that the barriers that get in the way to accessing a rich, rigorous curriculum are eliminated so that the needs of kids can be met.
Oh, here, Bob, do you want to just pick up on that in terms of like what you see in the national data? What has that led you to? What are practices that you want to make sure you shared with the educators here today?
Yeah, that I'm building on Pedro's thing of giving all kids access to advanced coursework. That some recent research we've done that shows that what kids really need to succeed in post-secondary is basically decent grades in challenging classes. And that's really attainable by all students. We have to remind ourselves that really all students can get decent grades in challenging classes. And there are schools that are doing that. The other thing that they're doing to help is they're doing very close progress monitoring of students on academic, behavioral, social, emotional, and sort of college and career readiness milestones. Because it's very easy for kids to fall through the cracks. It's very easy for kids to graduate and not actually be able to apply to the state university system because they haven't taken the right courses, the right sequence of courses. That can all be, if you're checking that every 3 months, that doesn't happen, right? But if you're not checking, you're leaving it to a specialist to do, it happens all too often. So the key idea really that we found really works is this core idea of teams of teachers and common shared sense of students, and it becomes their kids. And their responsibility every year is to have you done what you need in 9th grade to succeed? Have you done what you need to do in 10th grade to succeed? 11th grade, 12th grade? And that way they're brought along step by step by step, and no kid falls through the cracks.
I've been blessed in being able to work with high schools across the country. And in my experience working with high schools that claim to be innovative or that claim to be successful, I have found that they've moved beyond the textbook. It's not about the textbook. We're in a human resources profession. It's about the kids that sit in those desks in your classroom every day. The most successful high schools have the relationships where teachers care about those kids. Not only when they're sitting in their classrooms, but they care about the lives of those kids, who they are, and where they come from. And that is what marks the difference between successful high schools and mediocre high schools.
Hey, did you want to pick up on that? If so, not just the relationship piece, but what does the curriculum piece look like? What does the content, what does the expectations, the rigor look like in a context like that?
I think behind each of the structural models that are referenced, like exactly small learning communities and teams, the truth is you could have a group of teachers design very pedestrian curriculum. The structure won't guarantee it. The structure needs to be there. What I would do is start with the basic pedagogy of who the modern learner is. If there's any students in this room, they know what century they're in, and 20% of it's over. It's not just going to be a question of digital tools, because I think most American kids are not digitally literate. I think they have digital access. But it's infusing those tools and using the media that we have, the global possibilities, to take a hard look at all curriculum, all of the special offerings, but the core curriculum, and make it reflect the characteristics of a modern learner. It needs to be a self-navigator, a media critic, a good social contractor, and a global ambassador, an innovative designer, and you can make choices in curriculum where that is replaced. Modern content, modern assessments, modern skills.
Let me just make one comment, Andy. I rarely visit a high school where the high school's problems aren't K-12 problems. Students who are struggling don't start struggling the day they walk through the door in 9th grade. A lot of these interventions really need to be thought of as system-wide interventions.
Larry, do you want to talk a little bit about how this issue dovetails with this issue of school size and sort of, you know, this is a large school, this is a densely populated area, but like how should we think about the issues that have been raised here in this context of school size, which I know is important to you?
Well, quickly, I was principal of the Cambridge Ringen Latin School, which is the second oldest school in the country from 200 years ago. That was a very, very large building, and now I've got 16 very small schools, partly because of that. I think that the benefit for me is seeing kids create new knowledge, and when they're in a certain size of feeling within the faculty and knowing each other well, then they're able to create new knowledge. We have about 400 or 500 books that have been published by our kids. I was telling some faculty today about our kids who've been sending up rockets. The only people who can send up rockets in the middle of California for research purposes are UCLA and UC Berkeley and High Tech High and the Navy. And our kids are up to 2% shy of breaking the sound barrier. And they love the math, they love the science, they come into school early, they leave late, we can't get them to go home. That's what we want to do. Sorry for that to parents, we do let them go home.
So there, in every community, there's going to be some unique issues, but there's also, you know, Alexandria, like every other community, it's not a unicorn. So as you all think about some of the barriers to what the visions you've laid out, particularly where we think about equity, we think about population that's traditionally not been well served in schools here and elsewhere. How do you think about that? What are the takeaways, particularly after your day here, that you want to share?
Well, obviously, I live next to the border, and I'm very cognizant of the fact that California was stolen from Mexico. There's not even a fake narrative about that. And obviously, the demography of our schools is demonstrated in that, and a lot Asian as well, as a matter of fact. And for my own children, I'll leave it at this. My older son went to High Tech High, and he's now getting a PhD in something else, and has a son of color. My daughter went to High Tech High. She's Anglo, and she's now teaching in Harlem, in New York City, in elementary. That's what I want from a school of mine to iterate, is that we're all in this together, and we need to treat each other with respect.
So there's no question that communication and collaborating and communicating with the neighborhood and the school community is absolutely essential if you want to have success. But I know, as it was already mentioned, this is a community with many families that don't speak the English language, right? And so I've told my colleagues and I've told staff for the district that information is power. If parents don't have the information, how can they have the power? How can they be empowered to advocate for their own children? So with that in mind, I would direct and recommend to the school district that they continue their efforts in communicating with the families that don't speak the English language, that they work with the faith institutions, that they work with Spanish language radio, and they work with other collaborative community groups to send the message out to empower parents so they can advocate for their children to perhaps enroll in advanced rigorous academic programs, to become fully immersed in the high school experience.
I mean, one challenge, we work with about 50 schools doing high school redesign across the country, and one challenge they all share in common is that what the evidence base tells us, and a lot of this discussion we've had about equity and having good outcomes for all kids, essentially requires teachers to teach and learn ways to teach differently than they were taught. And that's hard and it's challenging. And so we really need strong structures that really enable teacher collaboration, teacher capacity building, learning from each other, and a means to have sort of continuous improvement. And I would really say that really what's going to be key to the high school redesign efforts here is that substantial resources are set aside to enable that teacher collaboration, capacity building, and continual improvement, because they've got to drive it, and a lot's going to be asked of them. And it will make their life better and richer when it's done, but the process of getting there will not always be easy, and we really have to recognize that and make sure there's full support in creating conditions that lets that happen.
Jonathan, Heidi, what would you like to add? Pedro, I have a...
Sing a duet. A duet.
Please.
Jaime's point, I think you made me think of. We were given, I don't know what the title of is like the course catalog for the high school, and I opened up to the first page, and I thought, it's bigger than some college course catalogs that I've seen. And I do this for a living, and it took me 15 minutes to get comfortable enough to really understand what was in there. I'm basically a native English speaker. You could probably argue with that, but my wife would. But it took me like all day long, sort of thumbing through it to get more comfortable with it. And I thought, gosh, if I was the parent of a really talented kid, but I'm not used to American schools, or I don't speak English. Who's going to take my hand and make sure they're guiding me through this so that my child, again, can one day get that equity of outcomes that I think we all have as a goal?
A little bit different way of thinking about this. We make decisions about curriculum courses. We make decisions about what we want to have our kids do and demonstrate. We want to see better and more engaging instructional repertoires emerge. But I think there's 4 structures that either make it possible or hinder us, and they are generally made by habit. And this is what's worrying me about right now. It's the nest I work in as a teacher. One is the physical space. If I am in 4 walls with little light, that's what I've got to work with. If I have chairs that are incredibly uncomfortable, half the energy of my class is spent getting comfortable in them. If I have a menu of spaces that I can use in different ways, then I start to think differently about the learning. That's one structure. Virtual space, too, which we saw evidenced at the satellite campus we visited today. The second structure is the schedule. I don't hear enough discussion about that. And I'm not just talking about an occasional block. I'm talking about the whole 9 yards. Teachers know that schedule's their destiny. If I've got 40 minutes, guess what I plan? 40-minute experiences. The third structure is the grouping of the learners, which I think you were picking up on, very much so, which is if we have static self-containers and I'm rigid in a group, I don't have the opportunity to interact. Maybe there should be more multi-grade offerings. Maybe we should look at who are these learners, what would be the best way to group them, as opposed to saying 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th. And finally, this is big, the grouping of the personnel. The siloing of departments. If we had an opportunity to be a teaching team, sign me up. But what it would be is everything would be altered by our interactions. Who I work with makes a big difference. We don't always give teachers an opportunity by talent. It's usually by how they're certified. So my suggestion in the places I work is to learn more. Find out what's going on. Open your menu. Otherwise, we sink back to habit.
Bob, did I see you? All right, then, Larry, you guys use schedule in some creative ways. So do you want to pick up on this and talk about that? Because there is a gravitational pull to the traditional way we do schedules, and you guys have achieved escape velocity.
You have a very interesting voice tonight. Well, you have to have a schedule, okay? You have to have English, history, math, and science, whether or not you think the decision over 100 years ago by 10 industrialists was a good idea, I don't know, but you have to, in order to get into college, you have to show English, history, math, and science, and so of course we have those. But we go beyond that in many ways, in particular with the works that kids do outside of school, for one, and also inside of school, where we don't isolate those subjects as much as typically happens. Sometimes they really make great connections with each other. And so that's quite important. And I think another thing, which I talked about projects before, is that about 4 or 5 times a year, parents come in to see the work that their students are doing. And all of our schools are absolutely jammed with parents. And that really tells the tale the most, when parents see the quality of work that their child is doing. And if, for example, I'm a new teacher, and my colleague over here and all of you are looking at his work and his students' work, and I'm new, and I'm not beating myself up because I'm just feeling guilty. And no one's beating me up in the organization. I'm just making sure that next time my students are going to be doing work just like his students and her students, because I don't want to be in this position again. And that's why making the work public throughout the year helps reveal a lot about what's going on in that institution.
So Pedro, you travel around a lot, and we've heard some different things here around scheduling, around the constraints of standards, but about breaking out. Just what have you seen sort of the best places where sort of innovation, standards, equity, rigor have been married? What are the high schools where, if I was going to ask you which ones I should go see, where would you tell me to go?
So I mentioned one already. I mentioned Culver City High. I could mention another one, Ossining, right outside of New York City in Westchester. I could think of one in Queens, Hillcrest High School. I invited a group of teachers from Tuscaloosa, Mississippi, who had never seen high-achieving black students before, to come and visit this high school in Queens. And they were blown away by the kids and realized the problem wasn't the kids, the problem was the way they treated the kids. So I really want to encourage the going out and seeing. But I wanted to come back to the barrier. The biggest barrier to me in this work is complacency, is the way in which we get used to the way things are. And we start to believe nothing can be done because we need to change the kids. And once that becomes the narrative, then it's lost. We have to realize, no, there are schools that have figured this out. We are smart enough to figure this out too. And we can learn from models, but our job is not to simply follow them like a cookie cutter. We need a solution that works for this community that we embrace and make our own. And I think when that commitment is here, then it's going to be possible to do this work here too.
And let me ask you then, like, essentially the political question. Which came first? In those communities, did the belief system then lead them to relentlessly figure out what worked, or did people do things that worked and that changed the belief system?
So this is an important point, and I heard the superintendent, sorry if I call you out there, superintendent. There's no community in the country where schools are making progress with constant change in leadership. Not one. If you can't keep a principal, if you can't keep a superintendent, someone cut off my mic when I started saying. If you can't keep your superintendent and principal, and they got to do their job, of course, but constantly changing, I don't see any district, any school making progress like that. The board, I know there's only one board member here tonight. I'm a former school board member myself. Board members have a responsibility to support leadership. They need to make sure they're asking the right questions, but they need to get out of the way too and let them do their job so that the schools can focus on education, not on politics.
My wife used to help train teachers in the former Soviet Union in Central Asia, and they would cut the mics off when they got to stuff they didn't want them to hear. But like this is backwards because the mics are getting cut off at the good stuff. So one issue that is a challenge here is just one issue that is a challenge here is just the density of the community, the real estate. Like, what do you do about, like, where do you actually physically site schools? And that's a challenge for all the school districts in this area. What are the advantages what do you all see with what you've learned about what's happening here and the challenges? What are the advantages and the assets of this sort of multi-campus approach and being able to use resources across the community? How should people be thinking about the opportunities that offers?
is this about this city or because I've seen some, well, you are spread out in multiple places, and I have 16 schools that are spread out in multiple places. So, you know, you can get to any one of them in 15 or 20 minutes. It's not like that. It's kind of similar to here in a way. As I was pointing out to my colleagues, all the people that they all, in all the schools, the leaders of those schools, they all meet every Monday morning, and I meet with them at 6 a.m. for 2 hours just to touch base about everything. It's not as if we're not one big organization, but it works rather smoothly, especially because different folks live in different places, and you know, public transportation is not what it should be, et cetera, et cetera. So it works fairly well with us. I think everybody here who, for example, might be Latino has an idea of who most of our population is because of where we are. But we also have a lot of folks of African American and a lot of Asians, as I said before. And all of them, of course, live in totally different neighborhoods because of that segregation. And we place the schools in awareness of that. So we're spread out in all those places as well. So that's how we've approached it.
Bob, I see. Heidi, could you pass? What have you seen, and what are stories in the data about how you can use this multiple campuses as an asset?
Yeah. So I think one of the big advantages about the multi-campus approach you have here is it really mimics what kids are going to get in post-secondary in many cases. And we know that the hidden crisis now in America is the college dropout rate, not the high school dropout rate anymore. 50% or more kids enroll in college don't make it. One reason they don't make it is they don't have the navigation skills to go from a very sheltered, structured environment to one where it is a multi-site campus. It is a multi-building campus. You've got to figure out how to get from place A to place B, and what's the public transportation that gets you there, and how do you get there in time for class, and how do you manage all your things, and how do you relate to different environments. So giving kids a taste of that before they get to college will give them a leg up. And it also, I think, will lead to this idea that you can really try to make 12th grade as much as possible in many ways as like the beginning of post-secondary schooling. So in that sheltered environment, they get a taste of the future, and where if they struggle, they can still build the skills not to struggle when it really matters.
Jaime, when you think about this question of relationships and making it relevant for kids, how do you think about both the assets of having multiple campuses and that ability, and also what are risks that people should be aware of?
I think it offers the high school students here a great opportunity for them to apply their critical thinking and problem solving. Certainly their divergent thinking from getting to building A to building B. Mommy and daddy are not going to be holding their hands all their life, right? And so it's important that those kids get a feeling of independence, a feeling of autonomy, by making sure that they are responsible and play their role in securing a successful high school experience. And so a multiple campus district would allow that to happen.
Yeah, I think that's a great potential, because going back to the definition of equity, you have kids with different needs. You can't meet them all here. There are a lot of kids who cannot function in such a large, unfortunately, impersonal environment. They will not thrive here. And so you have the resources to do things differently on different campuses that can allow you to meet different needs. And so I think that's an advantage you're working with, and one that I think should be capitalized upon.
Two thoughts. Piggybacking on your point, it seems to me there could be some reimagining and rethinking about the big building. That I work in some very large buildings, and many of the schools really do create a sense of smaller communities, and almost like villages within the big city, if you get what I mean, as opposed to this as one big massive place. So one thing I would be entertaining might be a different way of conceiving of how this high school layout might be set up into a smaller pattern. Second question, I think it's a great provocation that was raised today, was should we be a network? You've elected so far to be a network, but that means you've got to define what that looks like. That Vista California, which got one of the XQ grants, has done a really interesting thing, and they're about the same size as you are, though they have several high schools, but each is around 1,800 or something like that, is each school has what's called a learning engine. And what it is they have autonomy, but they network. They share what they're doing. So one could be PBL. Another might be dealing with the question of a PYP program or an MYP program. But when they meet together, they share what they're finding. They really act like a network. If you're in a network, you have a responsibility to the network. So I think down the line, you could think of them as almost R&D experiences. And the same thing could happen to the students, that they're part of a network and they're able to share their experiences so that the pre-college experience, I can envision seniors working with younger students about lessons learned when I was trying to transverse the campuses.
Great. I want to stay with you, but there was a lot of acronyms being thrown around. The XQ project was a high school redesign competition. It was a Lorene Powell Jobs and a number of different kinds of schools and consortia to create schools around the country.
Not to be confused with GQ. Thank you.
So staying on this question, but shifting, as you did at the end, to students, how should we be thinking about this question of multiple pathways? And particularly, how do you ensure that in an environment where you're going to have multiple pathways, you have rigor across all of them?
Why don't you define that word, that expression, multiple pathways for everybody?
Sure. So if you have different paths for kids to get to a diploma, and that might be things that are involving CTE and tech, different kinds of programs, different ways to get to that end point of a diploma. And right now, for context, Virginia does have multiple paths to diplomas, and we see real disequities in the data in terms of what kinds of kids are getting different kinds of diplomas. So this exists now, but it doesn't exist at the scale that is being envisioned by a lot of school systems. What's the promise of multiple pathways for kids in terms of rigor and engagement? And then what are the risks?
Well, okay, so again, we've got 5 high schools, 5 college placement officers, each run as first generation and worked in a highly selective college admissions office. So it's critical to us about that success data. And we also have a great public university system in California, a really huge one, and we also have a community college one. The community colleges have been very, very open to our 11th and 12th graders, which is fantastic for them to begin to feel that part of getting credits and feeling that they're with adults who are younger than them, and yes, I can do this, and this could be me, and I'm not afraid, and actually it's kind of interesting, and I'm meeting some other people that I didn't know before, and why don't I stay with this? So I think that those types of pathways are really, we're finding are fantastic for kids getting really motivated to stay on the path.
I mean, kids aren't widgets, right? And we know a lot more than we did even a generation ago about how they differ and in which ways they differ importantly, and which ways they don't differ importantly, or they differ unimportantly, like learning styles. Learning styles don't matter. Student interest, matters a lot. And so we are learning so much. This is driving me crazy. We are learning so much more about exactly how things should be personalized and what sorts of personalization don't matter all that much. Having multiple pathways just makes sense given all that we're learning now. Let me try it again. Okay. I was really impressed. I was really impressed by the satellite campus, and where you have students who have elected to really take a lot more responsibility for their own learning for every reason under the sun, which is exactly how that's supposed to work. Some are pushing through high school up to a year early. Some are using it to take AP courses on a more flexible schedule. Some are using it to combine work and school. Some spend time there and here. That's how multiple pathways is actually supposed to work. So I think that is a huge advantage that you have here, is that you do have some infrastructure that can really promote this, which that was probably the thing that kind of excited me the most today, in part because I think it's really underused right now. So as you develop that, I think that could help a lot of students.
Great. I see Bob, and then...
Yeah, so my take on this is similar but maybe a slight twist, which is when you look at the data, the kids that have the best outcomes at 26, the best wages, the best labor market outcomes, they're kids that actually took both a college prep curriculum and 3-link CTE courses in high school. And I would argue back from that the goal should be one diploma where kids would meet both those requirements, but multiple pathways to achieve that diploma. So I get nervous about multiple types of diplomas. I get very excited about multiple pathways to a common diploma, which shows that you have both, you're both ready for college and you also have some career tech background, because it's both and together that actually positions kids for the most chances for success.
So I go around the country and advocating here to my colleagues and to your district administrators that you have to know the client that you're serving, right? And in this particular high school, your largest ethnic group are Hispanic and Latino students. So what do they bring to the table? They bring their stories to the table. They bring their Spanish language to the table. You talk about offering alternative pathways to a common high school diploma. Well, one way for that particular subgroup of students to achieve the success that we all strive for is to allow them to navigate their core curriculum in the language they know best. And for many of those students, it's the Spanish language outside of a foreign language department. I'm talking about teaching math in Spanish, science, social studies, and all those core curriculum requirements that they need to graduate from high school. That honors who they are, that honors where they come from, and it honors the requirements that the federal government and the state government has for high school students in the state of Virginia.
Pedro, both the promise and the risk. In a lot of places, multiple pathways has ended up being tracking by a different name for all the usual reasons. So, like, what you've seen, what do you see as the promise, either as Bob laid it out or other ways, and the risk?
So you laid out the risk. The risk is that there will be some pathways that lead nowhere, that lead to dead-end jobs, that don't lead to college. The other risk, and this is important for this community, is that equity gets interpreted as mediocrity, as lowering standards and expectations, that kids aren't going to be challenged and pushed. And I think both of those are things you have to watch out for. I agree with Bob and what we've heard. Kids, there's no reason at all that these career and technical pathways can't be loaded with rigorous instruction and opportunities that result in access to college and careers. So learning from the best. I helped to set up a biotech academy in the Bay Area that's now over 25 years old. Those kids graduate earning good jobs in the biotech sector and are on a path to pursue science and math-related fields in college. So there's ways to do this without falling into those traps.
One thought is often I've seen the problem with the interpretation of a pathway is it will be a sequence of courses, and you're thinking of courses in the way you've always thought of them. Isn't there a possibility for more long-term actual research study? You'll probably recall the work, it still goes on in several states, of long-term, I don't need it, science research. And in fact, the last year's winner of the international, it's Google, I believe, that sponsors a research fair, was a sophomore from Greenwich High School. And it's because it was 2 years with the same group doing long-term research, as opposed to a series of quick courses. There could be cohort studies. I think we need to break the idea of a pathway out of the box, and maybe it doesn't have to be quite so linear. Paths can curve. Paths could have offshoots. They could be working with research organizations. And that maybe we want to provide a wealth of opportunities that isn't confined by our idea still of the 60-minute class, this course, you're on a pathway. I think all that is a sequence of courses, and not necessarily something that has that kind of integrity that I think we're after.
Yeah, I was a lawyer for a while, and I worked at the Center for Law and Education at Harvard with Paul Wechstein, and we were writing the School to Work Opportunities Act for the Clinton administration. And we learned a lot from watching how that worked out, and the way that we crafted it was that you had to be 16, as I suggested earlier, because that's where you get to work in a hospital, so we made that the cutoff. I've seen in the 40 years since remarkable data about how much better youngsters do when they have an opportunity to work in the public or private sector after their 16th birthday and all of our kids do it at our schools.
That's an important design principle because there's some concern about when multiple pathways start even younger, and so I see heads nodding up here with the 16. I mean, do you all share a concern that, you know, and some European countries, for instance, you get on these paths much younger. Do you all share a concern about that, or do you think you can drive this down even into the earlier grades? I didn't tell him I was going to ask that question.
Larry doesn't seem to use the mic when he speaks softly into it, so I'm going to talk like Larry this time. And I haven't lost them. Oh, I lost it. See, it didn't work. I was giving you so much credit. I was giving you so much credit. Yes, I share that concern. I think you can drive that down way too early. I think some of New York City's diversity equity issues within its selective high school is that they took a pretty good system 20-odd years ago and drove it down to 4-year-olds. And they, a lot of us said at the time, you may pay for this, and they're paying for it now. So yeah, I think there's a real danger in pushing it down too much.
And how do we make sure, one group of students we haven't talked a lot about yet tonight, how do we make sure students with disabilities are included, whether we're talking about the multiple campuses and particularly when we start to talk about multiple pathways, and that's a group of students that also when you look at the data, the outcomes are not equitable, not what we would want to see. So how do we make sure that they're included in this conversation?
So one of the key ways to do that is to recognize that we essentially have to create a system of supports for all students and customize it to what they need supports for. Instead of like separating students in, you're this kind of student, you're that kind of student, you're this student, and for each of you who have specialized supports, recognize that if our goal is to graduate all our kids ready for college and career, they're all going to need some kind of support somewhere. Maybe it's social emotional, maybe it's academic, maybe it's they have a learning difference and we have to help them have a different way to access the material. But no one is not going to need a support. And if we make support then a general practice where we basically closely progress monitor all our kids on basically a weekly, monthly basis on their academics, their attendance, their progression towards college and career, and then say we're going to pool our intelligence of those kids, what we as teachers know about them, along with the data, to make sure that every kid gets the supports they need to succeed in challenging courses, then students with disabilities aren't signaled out as some sort of special case and getting some sort of special opportunities and then not other opportunities. That said, obviously they need to have the supports their IEPs ask for, and that has to be done well. But I really think it's really essential in this environment of all kids to succeed to get this idea that every kid is going to need some type of support, and we need a general support system that brings in all kids, whether they be ELL students or special ed students or recent immigrants or whatever it is, and not see everyone as having to have their own specialized worker to do their supports.
All right.
In addition to that, everything he said is absolutely correct. They have to have the support, but the support from who? In my experience as a secondary principal, in my experience as a director of special education programs, I've often handpicked the teachers that these students whose classrooms they're going to enter. And the reason is not every teacher can teach a student with special needs. In Spanish, we use the word ganas. You have to have the ganas, the desire to want to work with students with special needs. And so when you handpick the staff and the supports are in place, those kids fly. And they reach their potential and they graduate successfully, and many of them do enter higher education.
So that the principles that they both laid out, I agree with. The challenge is how you organize it, how you deploy the support to the kids where they need it. And I know, in a school and a system of this size, that's going to be the daunting challenge, just as the schedule is a challenge. But if you start by thinking, okay, what do our kids need, and how do we deploy our resources to support those needs, I think it'll become less overwhelming.
When I was in Finland last year on a study group with 3 colleagues, a wonderful experience, we asked about special needs. And the Finnish policy is that 100% of students are in special education. But here's what they do. They organize in small learning communities. So one group of teachers has the same kids for several years. They start school at the age of 7. And so there's continuity. So the special educator can be adaptive. They work with the families. They have long-term teacher-student relations. And in middle school, as they get a little bit older, they make sure there's a sense of continuity, family, support. And the problem, I think, in high school is suddenly you're in a lot of different classes and a lot of different situations. So it strikes me that one thing to consider is the small community model, especially in the first few years of high school, where you can have some of that continuity. But I think it's a good point. I think that all students need to have special needs, but there's also specialties and severe issues and language deficits and cognitive functioning as well as emotional issues where our specialists are gold. They're amazing. They're the best trained people on how kids learn. And sometimes I think they're kept away from regular classroom teachers by schedules. We should be learning from them on how to make adjustments in our core curriculum.
Okay. All right. I'm going back, flashing back 40 years now to the School to Work Opportunities Act. And the idea there was, if I can, I'm trying to remember my kids' names in my family, let alone this act, but here you go. We wanted kids to have strong experience in and understanding of all aspects of an industry, including finance, planning, management, underlying principles of technology, labor issues, community issues, health and safety issues as they pertain to that industry. Wow, I can do it. Get it. The point of that is that they're going to be exposed as teenagers at 16 to this broad spectrum, and they're not pre-predicting what might be their future. They're experimenting with adults in a responsible role, what it might look like.
So 2 more brief questions. I want to leave a lot of time for the audience. Where did dropouts fit into this? This community, like a lot of communities, is struggling with the dropout problem, particularly among some populations of students. There can be this idea that you hear that if you raise rigor, it's going to increase dropouts. Most people who work with kids would challenge that and say that's exactly backwards. When you're seeing communities like this, you spent time today, they're struggling with dropouts. What do you see, and what are some of the thoughts that you want to make sure you leave both the EDT team and the community with?
Well, I've got 8,000 kids, and we have about less than 1% dropouts because they love being there, because they love what they're doing. I think dropouts. I think it's a reflection on a school when you have dropouts, frankly.
So, and I've heard that one of the particular groups you're concerned about are Latino males. And my hunch, because it's based on the research, is that they're dropping out to go to work and support themselves and their families. To keep them in, you have to show them how they can use their education to get better jobs. And that means that's why career and technical education can be a real valuable resource. But I would also focus on questions of belonging and attachment to school. Kids who are involved in music, in sports, in theater, do much better, have much better outcomes than kids who are not. You look at the kids who are at risk of dropping out, they have very weak relationships with the adults and no connection to school. That's what you have to focus on.
Actually, can I tell a very quick story based on that? We did a nationwide engagement survey, and by nationwide I mean all of China and all of the United States. China's very big, we learned. Very expensive to survey every high school student. We ended up sampling. But the big difference was that American students, Chinese and American students all value the same things. They all valued studying equally. They all valued socializing equally. They all valued extracurricular activities equally. That kind of surprised us a little bit. Chinese students actually study a lot. American students, not so much. American students spend a lot of time perfecting their socialization and extracurricular skills. Chinese students wondered what that would be like one day. Right? We showed this to American policymakers, and the American policymakers said, these lazy American kids, all they're doing is playing football and they're going to be out-competed internationally. So we went to share it with our Chinese policymaker contacts, and they're reading the report in front of us, shaking their head, and I'm like, they're going to lay into American kids like there's no one's business. And as God is my witness, this is a direct quote, the key guy said, why can't Chinese students learn to do extracurriculars and get along with other people? And I sat there and I thought, oh, maybe we're kind of onto something. And then he gave me a 30-minute speech about how American success is because we let kids learn how to interact and solve problems together outside of the classroom. My question would be, why can't we do that inside the classroom, too?
Jaime.
So I'm going to offer a different perspective. Currently, right now, my focus of research is working directly with gifted, advanced, and high-ability Hispanic kids that have trauma, toxic stress, and adverse childhood experiences. And I'm currently working with 3 young Latino men who have dropped out of school. And so when I ask them, what made you drop out of school? You know, you have your friends there, you can do extracurricular activities there. Their response was, I have no connection to any adults in that building. They don't care about me. I don't see them in my neighborhood. I don't see them in my community. They've never expressed any interest in my family or what I do personally, so why should I care about them? There's nothing there for me. And so repeatedly, I stress the importance of the relationships that teachers form with their students, particularly Hispanic males, because quite often they represent the single largest dropout group in American public schools.
Just 2 quick things to add to build on that is that the opposite of dropout is school connection or connectedness. And there's some good research from an unlikely place, the Center for Disease Control, on school connectedness. And they find that 4 things really show that a kid is connected and really serve as an antidote to dropping out. The first is, as we've heard, that they have adults in the school who they believe know them as a person and understand them and care about them as a person, not just as a student, but as a person. Secondly, they can find students like them, however they define like them. Third, that they're involved in a pro-social activity where they're doing something positive for other people and sort of giving back to others. We really underestimate the power of that. We think it's sort of a fringe activity or it's a community service requirement. But kids want to be pro-social, they want to give back, and there's actually some research that shows they're more motivated when they think their work will do something for others than for themselves. And we tend to think it's all about you. You have to do it for your future, your livelihood, it's all you. And the kids are saying, yeah, but what about me helping somebody else? So we don't give them that opportunity, but it's a key part of connectedness. And then the fourth part is a school culture that at a minimum is not toxic, that the kids don't feel pushed out or yelled at, and at a maximum is a place where they want to be every day.
So, last question, and then we'll do some we'll get the audience in. These conversations, often in the arc of this work with schools, you get lots of rich conversations at the front end and big ideas, big goals for down the road, but the connective tissue in the middle. What advice do you want to leave the EDT team, this community with, in terms of how should they think about measuring progress, holding themselves accountable as they go down this path? What should that look like?
I'll start on the end. So I would set the big goal and measure everything towards getting the big goal. And I would argue the big goal should be that everybody graduates meeting 3 conditions. That they've taken the courses necessary to enroll in the state university system, that they've had some technological experience, whether it be CTE or things like computer coding or robotics or other access to an understanding of technology. And finally, they've had some actual experience with college level work while they're in 12th grade. As much as possible, make 12th grade like the beginning of post-secondary. If you can agree on that as the big goal, everything else can be measured about what it takes to get there.
And I would add to that if you recognize what your end goal is and you have to make the connections with the middle level, then you need to make sure that those folks who are in the community, who represent the demographics of the school, are sitting at the same table, making the decisions with you not you making it for them. They need to be part of the process. They need to be sitting at the table, expressing how they feel and what they want in order for their children to be successful.
Building on those, I want to encourage you to keep using data to analyze the impact of what you're doing so that you can hold yourselves accountable and ask, are we making progress? And if not, what do we need to do differently? I know from having been here several years ago that this same conversation was happening and there's not been a lot of progress. And that often results in deep cynicism, especially amongst the staff. And so part of the reason why you go back to the data and say, well, is it working, and if not, why not? So that you're not just expecting people to act on faith. I also want to encourage you to work on building a sense of community in this place, because I heard something very disturbing, that graduation comes and very few staff show up. They even had to take seats away because it was embarrassing. That to me is a sign of a community that doesn't have a lot of pride in its schools. And so that we need to build the morale of the staff. We need to build a sense of teamwork amongst this staff, because you're not going to get it done unless they believe it can be done. Right? The last thing I want to say builds on something Larry said about his school, and the fact that they have to sometimes get kids to leave the building. Right? How often do your students come out of your school and say, wow, what a day. That was a hell of a learning experience we had today. That should be what we're after. Right? That is kids who are inspired by what they're learning. Don't stay fixated on the test scores. Get the teachers focused on getting kids excited about learning. When they remember that that's their job, then they remember that teaching can be creative work, and that when we do this work together, it can generally have an impact on our students.
I think the questions that should be asked should be very much about the actual students here. The questions might be, what type of grouping configuration will best match the needs of these boys? What type of personal connection will best help our 9th and 10th graders have sustained growth? What are the possible ways we could reconfigure our schedules? How might we rethink our spaces? Because if you start small, you're going to slip back and you're going to see we have the same kind of schedule, we just gave it a new name. I think the other thing is to be more invitational sooner than later. You need to start to bring in more infiltration of more faculty. More people need to be invited and involved. You need more voices, otherwise it'll feel like this was a plan that was done to me. Here's one of your best pluses. You've got a superintendent who wants to stay. We heard him say so. And that, I think, is an important piece, that this is the long game. So we need a new narrative here in Alexandria. The short game was we get stuff started, we slide back. We get started. That's changing now. And that, I think, needs to be communicated in every meeting and in every opportunity. But let's open it up. Let's get more input. And let's not stop with the sketching. You're in a sketching mode right now. Stick with it for a little while. You've never had any luck.
This is my third one. I don't think it's going to work any better. I agree with all those things. I would even say that stable, talented leadership isn't an important issue. It is your key important issue in this district right now. So doing whatever you can to maintain that at the department level, at the building level, at the district level, really has to be your focus. You've had way too much turnover. All that said, I tend to be a structuralist in many things, but the research also makes it clear that the structure doesn't matter much if you don't have talented teachers teaching a high-quality, rigorous curriculum. So always keeping those basics in mind is you could have the best structures in the world. If you have demoralized teachers teaching a crappy curriculum, you will see no differences whatsoever. So it really is comprehensive. It's a system. It's a system. And my last point, equity and excellence are not diametrically opposed concepts. I actually believe they're completely independent. You can achieve both. This is one country that for some reason we always treat them as either or. Lots of other countries don't. They see them as independent things that you strive for and that you could achieve together. But in doing that, the earlier you start, with little kids, the easier it is to have that by the time you push them out into the workforce or college.
The world is changing. Schools should too.
All right, that you guys can have fun measuring that. All right, let's. We've got a mic down here that hopefully. I feel like remember Yogi Berra said the food at that restaurant's no good and there's not enough of it. I feel the same way. The mics aren't working and there's not enough of them. But we've got one right down here for questions. I'd ask. So just come on down. I'd ask for questions. This is Washington, D.C., and we're all familiar with the politics here, and questions often lose that sort of interrogative spirit. And I know that there's a lot of strong feelings about these issues, but if you could ask a pointed question that one or more of our panelists can answer rather than a talk, that would be fantastic. Sir?
Good evening, everyone. If I could just make one quick comment. Larry Rosenstock, I worked for you for about 10 years ago. I helped open Tech High Chula Vista after several years as a high school teacher in DC, and I loved coming to work. It was hard to get me out of the building there. So ask him, ACPS representatives, ask him how he was able to create a school where teachers loved coming to work, because it was a joy every day. With that said, my question is, my children go to elementary school in Alexandria, and it represents the demography. It's majority minority, predominantly Latino. And if you go to the classrooms, you'll see that in every classroom, that demographic, except for one. There's one classroom that's almost entirely white, and that is the talented and gifted classroom. And I don't know, but I am told that same problem exists at other elementary schools, middle school, and the high school here. And I challenged the principal about this, and she was very much on board. Yes, this is a problem. We are dealing with it. I don't understand what's taking so long, but if you all could tell us, what can the school system do today, this week, this month, to fix this problem? Thank you.
Okay, actually, there are a number of different things that the school and the school district can do. The first is to consider universal screening of all students to promote the diversity and the equity and the access to advanced academic programs. Another very popular strategy that's being used by multiple districts across the nation is the use of local norms to identify talented populations within historically underrepresented populations, Hispanic, Latino, African American, Native American students that receive a free or reduced price lunch. So those are strategies that a district can consider immediately. Certainly one that goes a long way and that helps build capacity is professional development of teachers on being able to identify the characteristics of gifted and talented students from diverse populations. And my experience has been as one of those trainers and one of those professional development experts is that once teachers receive that training, we see referrals and nominations skyrocket. And because we see an increase in nominations and referrals, we see an increase in students receiving eligibility status to enroll in those programs. So just off the top of my head, those are 3 or 4 strategies that the school can consider at this point.
And Jaime, how does this relate to the information piece that you raised earlier?
The information
in terms
piece
of
is
democratizing
critical.
access
Okay,
to information?
one of my passion areas is in the area of gifted and talented education as it impacts Hispanic and Latino populations. 9 times out of 10, the parents are unaware that such programs even exist in the programs. So one way, again, to promote that equity, access, and opportunity is for the school or the district to promote those programs in the languages of the community it serves.
Jonathan, do you want to add anything? Obviously, this is your bailiwick.
I cannot say it any better than Jaime just said it, but that's pretty much, we have only hundreds of studies that back up everything that he just said, and yet I rarely go to any districts that are doing half of those things. Now, granted, a lot of the research is recent, but we need to communicate it better. But this is a solvable problem. We treat it like it's not. There's no reason Our advanced education programs defined broadly can't look like every other program. And I could talk about this for many, many hours, and I will spare you of that. But it was a very good question.
So, briefly, I might be the different perspective on this. We confuse privilege with gifted, typically, right? So a lot of the kids that we're calling gifted, their gift was their parents, right? Their parents were highly educated, had a lot of time, got them reading real early. That's wonderful. The clearest proof that most of them aren't gifted is they end up pretty normal when they get older, right? They're not extraordinary people. And that's nothing, that's not the point should be every kid should be challenged. Every kid should be challenged. We should be cultivating the talents in all kids. The problem when we have a gifted program is we send the message, this is the gifted kids, these are the giftless ones. Right? That's the problem, right? And that's what we've got to get rid of. Kids need to be, if a kid is ready to do multiplication in kindergarten, let them do it. If a kid's ready to read Moby Dick in 3rd grade, let them do it. Don't hold kids back. At the same time, cultivate the talents and strengths in all kids.
I mean, yes. Yes. However, show me a school district that's figured out how to do that for every kid, that has shown that they can really individualize to that level of detail. I will be the first person to say, get rid of these programs. I have said that repeatedly. A lot of my colleagues do. But we're not there yet. And there are students, again, regardless of skin color, background, etc., who do have tremendous talent, and they are not being challenged. If you don't want to do it in a gifted program, I'm actually cool with that. You got to bring something to the table to explain how we're going to meet those students' needs. There's a lot of research that we're not doing it at all right now.
Can I hop in
agree but disagree.
Let me hop in on a curriculum quick point. Here's the word that absolutely annoys me, and that's the word enrichment. I'm sorry. Everything should be enriched. What, we have an enrichment curriculum or a mundane curriculum? We're going to give the kids the malaise. The one thing I would say is in sports, because there is a point that is made here, you're right. In sports, if there is a student who shows excellence, superior ability, natural affinity for taking sport further, we give them that. Everybody knows there's the kid who's the singer you want to star in the musical as opposed to the one who can't hit the notes. We know that. But in academics, I think it gets politicized, and that's the bigger problem right now. How do we keep parents in our school? And if that's the real motive, everybody knows it, and that's what cheapens the programs as opposed to giving them the integrity that I think you're talking about.
That was very well put. And I would also point out, if that athlete doesn't develop, you don't blame the kid. You blame the coach. If that singer doesn't develop, you have a sit down with the choir director. You don't blame the kid in their circumstances, right? But we do that with academics all the time.
Well, I would argue, just to torture the analogy a little bit, in sports, really youth sports, it's a huge effort right now to break down structural barriers, because you have like Chili Davis, who played Major League Baseball, he's now a hitting coach. He says, like, if it was like it is now, he never would have made it to Major League Baseball. He never would have had those kinds of the opportunities. So there's a lot of hoarding and a lot of things, and so I wouldn't take the sports analogy necessarily too far. They're facing some of the same challenges that we're talking about. Okay, I want more questions. I will make one exception on the no comment policy. If you've worked for any of the panelists, that's okay, except Larry, because that card's already been played. But any of the rest of them. Otherwise, just pointed questions, no comments, please.
Okay, thank you so much for coming and sharing your expertise with us. I am curious, as many of us work in ACPS, we are trying to systemize our work, making it more equitable for all students. How do you suggest overcoming some of the teacher reticence to change or administrator reticent to change, especially when you have the conflicting priorities of certain parents, certain political conflicts that come into play, and you want to retain teachers, you want to retain leaders. I mean, there's this conflict there, this tension there between making changes that are important for students, but also building up the staff so that they are capable of implementing those changes in a systematic way.
Bob, do you want to take that? Because you've seen this around the country. What have you seen sort of that works in terms of this change management, and what are big pitfalls in terms of the question she laid out?
And I think you were getting at it. It's twofold. One is you can't, the force method doesn't work, okay? Like do it or else. But two things that work. One thing that works is beginning small scale. Begin with a small pilot in a grade. And there's no better evangelist for a thing than a teacher that could say, I was skeptical, I tried it, and now I really believe in it. And you want to sort of build that up, and once you get to a critical mass, then like you could turn the whole school, right? Once you get enough respected teachers saying, we were skeptical, we tried it, it's better, you will get the Army to follow you. The reason the Army doesn't follow you right away is rightly they've been burned a lot. Right? They've been told a lot of promises and a lot of miracle cures and a lot of effort that didn't go anywhere. So there's some well-earned cynicism about that. The flip side of it, too, is that once you can get them to try it just a little bit, if in fact it is a more powerful way and it does work, most people will move towards it because they became teachers because they wanted their kids to succeed and they wanted schooling, to Larry's point, we heard, to be a place where they're excited to show up every day. And so there is a way to sort of start small, like a snowball, and really sort of build the snowball, and pretty soon it's rolling down the hill. That said, as I mentioned, the other thing is that the district as a whole has got to come through with the conditions which enable the success, which is time for teacher collaboration, which is time for teachers to learn from each other, to observe each other's classrooms, to do things together, and then to have a system where they can do continuous improvement. They can try an idea, test it, look at the data, see if it worked, change it, and then they've owned it, they've created it, and then you can't stop them.
I would add that before you get to that point, you have to have those courageous conversations with those folks to understand what their values and belief system is. It has to be in a nurturing environment with an expert that is able to control the room, because the emotions run quite high. As a building principal, I've had to deal with staff members like that, and it begins with those difficult conversations.
All right, yes, ma'am.
Yeah, so I have a question about accelerated learning. So it seems, and I wrote a long email to the superintendent about this, that the growth mindset says it's not what you are, it's what you do that matters, right? And yet we label people what you are. You are talented or you aren't talented, instead of you can do accelerated learning or you want to do it. In terms of curriculum, in terms of strategy around pulling kids as far as they can go, what are your thoughts about a reorientation away from talented and gifted as a label of what you are into a frame about what you can do and want to do? Because it seems to me that that's a lot more constructive and a lot less exclusive, and that may diffuse the sort of politicization of these things.
Yes. Yes, I've been saying this for years. Part of the problem that we have with education in general is we confuse current performance level with current potential level. And if you're looking at gifted kids, one that kind of widgetizes them, which I don't love anyway, it makes them a commodity, but putting that aside, you're really generally looking only at what their current performance is, and you tend to miss all the kids who have amazing potential if they just had better support, and quite frankly, more people believing in them. From a more sociocultural perspective, I just think that makes perfect sense to be focusing more on helping every student, to Pedro's point, helping every student figure out what the what the limits of their natural ability are with the right supports in place. That's a very different vision of education that lots of people have, though, as I find every time I say that, people throw tomatoes at me. But I think it makes a lot of sense.
I want to get to as many questions as we can, so unless someone violently disagrees with that. All right.
Hi, I agree and appreciate with the goal to instill a love of learning. That's my personal philosophy, and that's what I've tried to strive for with my child. But my 5th grader tells me almost every day, school is boring. I hate going to school, it's boring. And I know in Virginia particularly, we are so focused on the standards and the tests, and you all said don't teach to the tests, but are our hands tied by those tests? And the fact that that is such a metric that everybody has to meet.
So, yeah, who wants to, and is there a school district in the state where kids are doing well and they're not bored? There must be.
Yes. I think that the role of testing has been amplified so out of proportion. It's quite startling. All of us can identify public schools, all of whom, depending on the state, and it's very state-oriented. The states are different from one another. They really are. Some have high stakes in evaluation that honestly, if I told you the state, you wouldn't even want to drive through it. The question here is, what are all the different ways we show evidence? The standards are proficiency targets. There's a million ways to teach them. They're not curriculum. They tell you what the targets are. They don't tell you what to teach, how to demonstrate it. What you want are rich learning experiences, so that if someone says students need to take a stand on an issue, choose a contemporary issue. Let them think like in a pre-college course. Give them ideas to jump into. Let them make a documentary. That's really good evidence of their learning. And yeah, these tests are reading tests. Remember that you can't take a math test or an English test or a social studies test unless you know how to read it, make sense of it, and respond. So should we prepare? We should prepare for better readers. We should prepare for those types of settings. But that doesn't mean it has to be at the expense of rich and engaging curriculum. I'll be very honest with you. I have a long career. I have never been in a school where we couldn't take the curriculum and make it juicier. You can make it better. And you still have to deal with this system, which I believe is starting to give. It is starting to give. The testing industry is not going to have us in shackles that much longer. And some states are seeing the value, as are businesses and colleges, of different forms of demonstration. So I'm with you.
Let's pause here, though, on this question of measurement for a minute. Pedro, so if the testing industry is going to give, we're going to get rid of these tests. We've had a rich conversation tonight around equity that's been pretty grounded in data at different points, implicitly or explicitly, in the data that we have. So what's the mechanism to make sure that the old disequities don't just pop up in an environment where you're not having some sort of testing of some kind in something of a standardized way?
So I'm not going to go so far as to say we don't need some assessments. I think we have to assess. We have to use it as a tool, not as a weapon, right? We have to use it as a tool to diagnose learning needs, as a tool to make sure kids have learned what we think is important, and to give feedback to teachers and to students and to their parents about how well kids are doing. So I think that assessment just needs to be put in its proper place. And what's happened is we've allowed assessment to drive everything. And I think that's where we've, fallen by the wayside. We need much more focus on curriculum, teaching, and learning.
All right, we're going to do one more question. It has to be a quick one, sir.
All right, real quick. Let's talk about the culture of fear amongst teachers to be creative, to be excited about coming to work. Let's talk about the culture of fear that exists in Alexandria Public Schools. And I'm a straight shooter. I've taught for 30 years, and some of the school board members don't have an opportunity to actually go sit in a classroom and see some of our cited specialists in the field of education, our teachers, our school administrators. We keep hopping around the facts. The facts are, if I'm scared to lose my job, I'm not going to be creative. I'm just going to go along the line. I'm just going to do what everybody else does to keep their job. I'm not going to push a student whose parent may be political to do better. Let's talk about that. Let's get it off of the fact that our kids are scared to do something different. Our teachers are scared to do something different. Let's work with it. Let's be about action and not about all these community meetings and stuff.
All right.
Let's talk about it.
Thank you.
Let's
So,
do it.
someone who wants the last word on this kind of change management that the question points out.
I have the mic. So, I mean, I think he's raised a really important issue. We don't do well in fear, in the context of fear. We've been up here encouraging you to get kids engaged, encouraging you to be creative, get kids inspired. But if there's an atmosphere where that's not encouraged, then we're not going to see that happen. So go to Abington, Pennsylvania. Abington is one of the few districts I know, right outside of Philadelphia, where the disparities in achievement have been closing for the last several years in a row. They are genuinely a learning community, and it's a kind of place where people want to work. And it's a place where the leadership can explain what they're doing to the board and the community, and they have total buy-in. And so, again, you can learn from the places that are doing it right, and they're certainly not using fear as a motivator.
All right. Please, first of all, join me in thanking the school system for bringing in these terrific panel of experts. I apologize that a couple of them have flights to catch, and so, but some others will be around, and so you may be able to buttonhole them for a little bit of one-on-one. But please join me again in thanking them and thanking Alexandria Public Schools for hosting this.